states. So, I just turned quickly to a cell phone one. We get to deal with cell phones quite a bit. In the middle school, if you're a student who has their cell phone out during the day, a teacher or a school personnel can ask you to put your cell phone away. That's typically what happens the first time that we hear it or see it. And if there was ever a second offense, then it might mean that that phone ends up in my office and they have to pick it up from me at the end of the school day. Third offense would mean that I usually give a parent phone call. And those third offenses are typically like not usually something that happens in the day. Let's be brutally honest. Our students at Northfield are fantastic. We don't tend to take a phone away from a student 3 times in a day. I've never done that, but most students know. There's a very elite group of people that have ever made it to the third offense of cell phones, and those parents know me pretty well. So long story short, what's nice about the handbook is it does lay out what is that behavior that we're trying to address. And then it gives us a jumping off point for how we should respond as administrators. The thing that I've always appreciated, this is the 3rd school district that I've worked in as an administrator. One of the things that I really do appreciate about our handbook and the way that it's set up, and I want to thank the school board for that, is there's discretion for administrators to make decisions in lieu of what the guidance is in the handbook. And a lot of times what we'll end up doing is it may be like a 1 to 3 day suspension for like a behavior. If a student is showing remorse or the parents are involved, or we know the circumstances behind which the behavior happened, I like that window that happens in there. Like 1 to 3 allows us a little flexibility in which we can factor in all the things. It's not always cut and dry with a student, what an administrative response to student behavior should be. So I've always appreciated that there's a varying degree in there that allows us to kind of factor in some restorative practices and stuff. Sorry, I mean,
I was just going to add, as a new person this year, for me, one of the first questions I asked is, where's the handbook? Because just as an assistant principal, you know that you are going to need it. And so I usually have it sitting on my desk and ready. Something I can say that this year, I really did not have to use it very much. With COVID and with our groups being small and hybrid and all of that, I have to say, I think it's a combination of the kids here they're really just well behaved in general, and just the way that the year went. So I did use it at times. I always had it available. And of course, there were small things that came up, and it's always important for a new person to know how is that handled in the district. And there are times when there are really sticky situations where you really need to know the handbook, know where to find what you're looking for, and to be able to really delineate what the behavior was and what the consequences can be. Like Michael said, I do appreciate having some windows and not just having everything be a really cut and dry response, because there are some behaviors that do have other pieces behind them that we might know just because we know the kids. So Matt asked us to get together and Michael to lead our group to look at the handbook, because my understanding was, since I wasn't involved with it before, is that every year, people kind of look at it and see. And I think this year, there were probably more little edits, nothing really big, but I think there were more just because there were 2 new people in the group. There was a new person leading it. And so it just had a different feeling, I think, this year. And just with different people coming from other districts and stuff, I think that we just had some different pieces to add from our different experiences that we brought to the process. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, so I think what I wanted our assistant principals to do is share what is the practical way, right, that they use this document. And then I wanted to have you to have an opportunity to ask any questions, specific to how they use the document from your perspective. And I think the key thing, what you heard here, is that they appreciate the clarity, right, in terms of the direction that the board is giving them for consequences for student behavior. They also appreciate the professional respect that the board and community have provided to make the best decisions for the individual student. Our mission, our vision statement talks about preparing every student for lifelong success. And sometimes when a student has made an error, a little bit of flexibility within guardrails, which is what I really see the student citizenship handbook as. There's guardrails to be able to make those, so there's consistency, yet empathy for when we can use it as a teachable moment. So I would just like Amy to be able to ask board members if they have questions or comments for Michael and for Nancy.
Any comments or questions from the board? No.
How is this document distributed to the parents?
Well, I was going to say, I know at the high school, and again, this was a little bit, I know that it goes out on a link to them. I think in the past, there were paper copies that were distributed, and I think that that practice is no longer happening, the paper copies.
Okay,
Mhm.
about 3 years ago, we went away from the paper copy. So Noel and anybody listening, the student citizenship handbook is posted front and center on the district website. On the left-hand side in your drop-down menu, there's a section called handbooks. If you click that, it is an English and Spanish version. Not to be confused with each school's handbook. This is the student citizenship handbook, which every administrator has. So it's posted publicly for people to dive into. And then staff members have it blasted out to their iPads as well. Students. What did I say?
Yeah.
I said students.
Any other questions? Tom?
I like that you have flexibility because kids are kids and they're not, they act like kids. And also all the kids have stories that they walk in with. And all that often plays out in ways the parents are surprised about when they get a phone call. I never paid attention to the student handbook or any of the handbooks until it was necessary to. And so I wonder, I don't know, I guess it's one of those things, you get so many emails and so much information that what do you spend your time on? And so I wonder if a paper copy of something isn't of more value than, a link that you may or may not see, or even something where the parents have to check off that, yes, they're aware of this and that they looked at it or discussed it with their kids or something. It just seems that there are all these handbooks and you don't, my kids were not angels. And so you don't know about it until it applies. And
Until you get a call from us.
yeah. So anyway, I mean, just something so that people are aware of it.
Well, as you can see, I like my paper copies also. So I print it out and I have it sitting with me. I don't know what the past practice was on that, or if, it could be made available, or if there's a way that we can ask people to sign off on that. Yes, I've either checked out the link, or, could I please get a paper copy of it? Something like that.
I would just say that over the years, we've things evolve, right? There was a time period, if I'm remembering correctly, where parents did sign off on it. It wasn't even all that long ago. And then actually what we learned is that people were signing it without reading it, and so that became another difficulty. But Tom, what I'll tell you is that we are, we're a little bit about continuous improvement around here. So I think that we will continue to try to find what is the way to provide the information to people so that they pay attention to it before they need it. Amy and I have actually talked quite a bit over the last year about trying to reinvent our handbooks, to take them from, we need a written piece, right? You need something written because when a parent needs it, they want to be able to go to the handbook, see the situation and make the connection in the table. But Amy and I have been ideating about how we could potentially reorganize how we present the handbooks so that it's more than just the document itself, but that there's possibly a video overview and some other resources that people could engage in a shorter amount of time to be able to get the gist of it, if you will. Just because someone signs it does not necessarily mean that they have understood it or even read it. We have been experimenting with some things because of the cost of printing and frankly, people who just put them into their recycling. We've been experimenting some things that I call kind of postcard to web. So the potential way of having either a sheet of paper or a postcard like thing that goes to parents that says, hey, make sure you review the student citizenship handbook, having a QR code and then some kind of short link available for people to go. And of course, we do allow for any parent who would like a paper copy of the Student Citizenship Handbook, we will print and give them a copy. We get very few requests, but we do get a few of those requests each year and we fulfill those. So we will continue, Tom, to make sure that we can do to the best of our ability to be able to give people the information that they need. But unfortunately, I do think that at the end of the day, there's a large chunk of people who still won't look at it until they need it. But I think there's some creative and modern ways that we can, with a short attention span that we have from people, that we can potentially do a commercial, if you will, for the Student Citizenship Handbook. And that's part of what we're working on for next year, as Amy and I have talked about that over time.
Yeah, that, I think that could be something that kids were even involved in, some kind of a video like that. And I also just want to add that one of the pieces that I believe we added in this year was just to leave some room for restorative practices and to look at other alternatives for keeping kids in school while still trying to correct behavior. And at least I can speak for the high school. Our security folks are really on board with doing that. And we have a lot of conversation around how we can do that. And especially this year where if a student was to be suspended during hybrid, that might have meant the kid just being out of school for weeks, so we really tried to work around that and change behavior.
Nancy, could you just briefly, would you define what restorative practices are, please? Because I don't think everybody knows what it means.
I don't know if I have the perfect definition, but I would say it's a way of resolving something so that behavior is improved and that people feel like they were honored and respected and that kind of peace was achieved through it.
My gist to that one is consequences don't always change behavior, but conversation can. And so restorative practices allow for that conversation that sometimes does not happen in a traditional handbook that says step one, Tom has to be sent home for 2 days. It's very difficult to then have a conversation with you, Tom, if you are at home, but in restorative practices allows for people to sit down if they're comfortable doing it, right? There's never anything forced, but it's a comfortable way of having conversation to talk about, the antecedent, the behavior. And then there are consequences that still come with restorative practices, but you get the A, B, and the C, and you get what happened, the antecedent. Let's talk about your behavior. How can we change it for next time? And then, there still is, still might be a consequence based off of your actions. So.
Other comments? Claudia?
Hi, Michael. It's good to see you. I was thinking, I've seen you in action, so I know that you're an excellent administrator, and even just using that word doesn't seem enough. I mean, you're just great at relationship, and I've seen you have those tough conversations with students. There was an occasion where I even got the privilege of interpreting for that student and seeing you work through the situation with them. So I trust you, and I trust the other administrators at our school. My issue, or not really not issue, just my question is, in those areas where there isn't a first offense this, second offense that, what in the handbook we have an asterisk to indicate a little bit of freedom there. For example, disruptive behavior, and then there's a what are you going to do in that situation? So the ones that have the 1, 2, 3, you guys will do great with that. But I wanted to hear what the process is when you have a student that you need to be flexible because you've had that relationship with them. You stopped them in the hall informally. You've had a conversation with them after school, before school. So there's been a lot of investment already in the student. And here they have a disruptive behavior episode, say. So that first incident is really not the first, because you've already kind of been, shepherding them. And here we are. Now we need some solid, real action that's going to get filed away, right? So just wanted to hear on those hard cases or tough conversations, how you move through that. And specifically, is there some accountability for that? Because, we all have good days, bad days, maybe we didn't eat that day, that kind of thing. And so all those things come into play, and there's just, it's a double-edged sword of giving teachers and administrators that freedom to have that relationship and to have a consequence that reflects. But then the other side of that is, of course, the person is always going to say, I was treated unfairly, because there isn't a black and white, what we do in this situation. So just, I was curious if there's some conversation that then happens with other administrators or teachers, some way of coming back to why you chose that consequence, if you will.
Absolutely. So on multiple levels, I want to get to your question. So Rico, Nancy, and I, along with Sam, Scott, and Nancy, we have conversations frequently because we see the same students, and there might have been something that Mr. Sanis did in elementary that it would help me out supporting a sixth grade student. Or Rico has asked, he's called about a freshman saying, "Hey, did you have conversations about being disruptive with this young lady?" Absolutely. This is kind of where we left off middle school. So that dialogue is there. And I'm really proud of the administrative team for being able to make those phone calls in the middle of the day and saying, "Hey, what do you know about this student? What do you know about this family? How can I help support this person?" So that's there. That is the backbone of the piece that we do. And we do strive to build relationships so that if a student is being disruptive in science class, it better not be the first time I've ever had a conversation with that student before. So getting to one of the questions you asked, if there's an asterisk and it allows us to kind of apply what we feel like we need, there is a section, believe it or not, in here about possible disciplinary actions. And it might mean sitting with me during lunch. I think you've probably been with me during one of those lunches. I'll have a student sit with me during lunch and we'll do that restorative conversation. They don't love eating lunch with me. Let's be brutally honest. It's not super fun, but that conversation can be had about, if you were disruptive in science class, how do you think that looks, sounds, and feels? How difficult is it for the teacher to do their job, the students do theirs? And at the end of the day, for you, what do you want to get out of science class? Sometimes that disruptive behavior, though, needs a little more than maybe a lunch bunch with me. Believe it or not, I do believe in escalating consequences as well. So if we try something that doesn't work, we try something different. If it continues to be an issue and that teacher cannot teach and learn in that classroom, then we may have to remove that student for one day or bring a parent in to have a conversation at the end of the day. So those are some of the things that I lean on. I don't want to take too much. I mean, do you?
Well, I would say that we do a lot of the same things. However, there also, if there's something that keeps going on, and it just seems like it's coming from all angles, we do have a lot. And that's one of the things as a new person here in Northfield, I've been so impressed with is we have a lot of support systems for students. And so there tends to be, if there's something like that happening, it's usually happening in more than one class, and we're usually hearing about it from different sides. And there's usually some kind of backstory about what's going on. And then we might bring that student to either like our multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS meeting. Sometimes it might be a district-wide MTSS. It could be a family issue, that's affecting more than one of the kids, the family. We also have our SST, our student assistance team to address some of those problems. So when we come together to problem solve, sometimes other people in the group know more about what's happening because they have a different relationship with the student. They may have some more information. So then from there, we figure out what our plan is. So it might be a plan that involves other people and other even agencies sometimes.
I want to get to another layer of your question. Partnering with the teachers has a lot to do with it too. They're the ones that are empowered in that classroom. And so if there's a disruption and let's say a student needs to leave, there's a large part of me that believes the teacher is disempowered in a situation if I address all of it myself. So I know that a lot of times we need to carve out space for that conversation with the student and the teacher to re-empower that teacher moving forward. I'm going to, all joking aside, I had an 8th grade girl down the home stretch of Q4. I was really struggling in class and come to find out that her and her significant other, her boyfriend, had broken up and they were in the same classes because we did a lot of the pod mentality for in middle school. And so seeing each other for 4 or 5 classes a day was not super helpful for either one of them after, not working out their differences in middle school. And so, that was something that we kept an eye on, getting to and we would never have figured that out unless we had that conversation with that student. And then really going back to the teachers and saying, hey, this is kind of where we're at with this situation. We do need to keep an eye on it. They probably shouldn't sit next to each other anymore, that kind of thing. So we try to get to the root of it as much as we possibly can on a human level. If I don't have to use that handbook, I won't. That's really there when we need it, when we feel like we have to make one of those decisions and we don't want to be the mean assistant principal that's, coming down hard, coming down heavy. So I feel like we get a lot of layers there.
Yeah, I think what I would like to hear about is the bleeding into that objective, subjective, like how did you arrive at that decision for that consequence? So I know like the background, there was lots of conversations before and you decide on a certain consequence for that student. That student obviously, and that parent probably may say, oh, that wasn't fair, so how do you explain how you arrived at that situation for this student, but this other student got a completely,
Well, I think part of that is making sure that you're including the parents along the way, because it shouldn't be a surprise. Like, when you talk about progressive consequences, parents need to be involved at the beginning. And that way they know what you're thinking and they know what's coming and they know what your expectation is. So I think a lot of that is avoided, but you have to make sure that you're communicating, so that's my first thing is calling.
You have to partner with the family. Let them know. I'm pretty crystal clear when I let families know, like, if this were to happen again, this is what the handbook spells out for the next time that it happens, if that makes sense. So,
but on some of these, it doesn't spell it out.
but on most of them, it
Yeah,
does,
most
Gloria,
of them,
where
yeah.
you have the first one is an asterisk, and then the
Mhm.
second one might be that they get removed from
Okay,
class. And
sure.
the third one is like a suspension. So one of the blessings, and it goes back to something Nancy had said earlier, one of the blessings is that, when you look at like an RTI model, we're talking about less than 3% of our students ever get to the second offense. And so, usually that first offense, you partner with a parent, you talk about it. This is what it's going to look like if it happens again, and you get to the root of why it's happening and some of that restorative practice stuff. Then 97% of the time, we don't get to the second offense.
And I was also going to add, and we talk to each other. One of the things, well, Rico and I, as new people, we wanted to get to know our other admin. And if we have a question about something, we're not sure. First of all, we talk about it with our building people. Say like, hey, let's talk about, how should this progress? And we talk to our colleagues too, because it's important for us to be consistent. We're not going to be exactly the same, but I think it's important for parents to know that when they go from elementary to middle school to high school, they can expect consistent communication and consistent application, of rules from the admin.
Other comments, questions? No.
On page 5 under teachers, and I think I understand what it says, but all teachers shall have the responsibility, have primary responsibility for student conduct. I was a teacher and I'm glad I didn't have responsibility for student conduct. I'd find another line of work. So I think the interpretation may be correct, but the language is not correct.
Well, I think it's set up, sir, to make sure that teachers have the authority to run their student management in their classrooms the way that they would want it to. And
So they define student conduct.
um,
No?
can you clarify that?
No?
So in this handbook would obviously, this one of the primary goals of this handbook is to identify those maladaptive behaviors. So these are the things that are significant disruptions to the learning. I think this is in here as a part of saying, hey, before we get to these 45 maladaptive behaviors, as teachers, we're expecting you to set up your learning environment so that it's safe and supportive for all students. You're empowered to do the things you need to do. So if a teacher asks a student to go take a break out in the hallway and go get a drink of water and come back when you're ready, that's not in this handbook, but it gives the teachers the green light to take that step with a student.
And that was my intent, that the teacher defines guardrails, but not the explicit day-to-day directives.
And typically those are the teachers that help us flesh out. Then getting back to Glory, the question about the whole, like, if we have a student, a lot of times teachers will call us and say, this is the third time this week. Can you have that conversation? It just can't happen again today. And we might not have had any interaction with that student on 1 and 2, but the third time they're like, hey, Mr. O'Keefe's time to talk to Mr. O'Keefe. So that's why we try to empower the teachers as much as we possibly could. But we've got their back if it prevents the teaching and learning from happening. Yeah. Claudia, I apologize.
Other questions, comments? Tom?
Sort of going on what Claudia said and not accusing anybody of it, but if a child of one race is treated differently than another in these instances where you have flexibility, and you're called out on it or something, how do you respond to that? Again, not saying it does or not, but it could.
You mean like if somebody felt like they were getting uneven consequences? Well, one of the things that's always hard for parents to understand is we can't talk about the consequences that another student has, right? So that's always the first thing that I say. And I tell them that, I am using the handbook and that I am giving consequences in a fair manner. And anybody can always say, well, yeah, everybody's going to say that. But I think when you have a relationship, and I know Michael does this too, like when we have kids that we know that are getting into those kind of things more frequently, that our kids that are going to these higher level offenses, our most important thing is to have communication with parents and have parents trust us. If they don't trust us, it doesn't matter who it is, they will say that this was unfair. There's many roads they can go down with that. But my antidote to that is just to make sure I have that communication and that they know that I'm being honest with them. And that just only happens from a history of honest experiences and trust.
I would just also add, Tom, that we've been really working, as you know, on building the cultural competency of our entire staff. And Mr. O'Keefe was one of the first administrators that I assigned to go to something called the Courageous Leadership Workshop. It's an intense 2-year program through Minnesota State University, Mankato, that really focuses on leading in a culturally responsive way, and including discipline. And so it's not all that cheap. So we can't send everybody all at once. Plus, I actually need some administrators back here to run the ship. But Michael was one of our first people to complete that. And so we are having principals and assistant principals and district office staff. Aaron Bailey is going through that training right now as well, because, and you've already done it, haven't you? Yep. So we think that training of our administrative staff, first of all, to make sure that we're aware of our implicit bias is an important part. And then also to be very honest and recognize that we want to make sure that we are working in a way that is not only fair in conversation to parents, but also in the way that we document it. So I think your question is, do we have some protections, and are we making sure that people are truly being fair? I don't believe I could look anybody in the eye and say without a shadow of a doubt that we're being completely fair across the board. I can't promise you that. I don't know the answer to that. But what I can tell you is that we have invested in our leaders to make sure that they are as well trained as they possibly can be to ensure that fairness, and to make sure that we are treating students as close to equally, though equally isn't the right one, right? We want to treat them equitably based upon the circumstances that they're in. So I would just offer, it's not something that we are, it is an area that we want to make sure that we are well trained in. And I think I'm very pleased so far with how many people, as soon as we say, hey, would you like to do courageous leadership training? Absolutely. How do we do it? I tend to talk to the buildings and say, we're assigning this administrator to be able to attend this training. And this is in addition to all the trainings that we have done within the district. So I think the first piece, Tom, is to make sure that we're honest about it, and to make sure the people who are involved with that responsibility or that authority are as well trained as they can be.
Comments, questions, any others? Well, I just have a couple things. First, I want to thank you, Michael and Nancy, for your thoughtful and compassionate approach to student citizenship and student discipline. I have watched the evolution of this handbook, and it gets better and better through the years. And I know you have been putting your touches on it recently, so thank you for the contributions that you've been putting into the handbook. One of the things I really like is the grids with the rights and opportunities on the left side and the responsibilities on the right side. I think it's actually very clear and easy to read in that format. And so I think that's a nice advance for the handbook. I love it if you would think about how we can make both parents and students more aware of the handbook and continue finding new ways of at least letting them know that it's there so they can refer to it, because I think it is a very important document and it's something that the board has to approve. And so it's essentially policy. It is policy. So I think it's important for there to be at least an awareness of it. People don't have to have it memorized, but they have to know where to go if they have any questions about it. So that's just another layer on there. I have one question, and that is, do you track disciplinary actions that you have? Not for the individuals, but I'm talking about aggregates and, is the school getting better? Are there fewer disciplinary actions? Are there, is there any sort of trends that you see? That's what I'm wondering about.
Why don't you go ahead?
I can take the tracking piece. So we definitely, we record when we have the conversations with students, and it is the least favorite part, I think, of any administrator's job is the paperwork, right, that comes with it. So when we have those conversations, when we call home, we always document that. We make sure that parents get kind of a write-up of what the conversation looked like, kind of what the administrative decision was, really the circumstances behind it. Because sometimes we have students whose parents don't call us back or not available. And so sometimes we do it in writing. So we do keep track of it. And we do have a system that we put it in. It's all kept actually in Skyward, believe it or not. It's in the student file, their cumulative file, the digital student file in Skyward. And then for significant events, we have to report to DERS each year. And I don't know what the acronym stands for, Dr. Hillman, if you know it.
Disciplinary Incident Reporting System. So we have to report anything that's a suspension or an expulsion. We're required to report that to the state at the end of the year.
And that data, I was not prepared tonight to share trends and data. I didn't know that I was going to need to bring the statistics. I could get those for you, but we obviously keep track of that. And the nature of being a middle school or a high school assistant principal is we get a new group of people each year, right? And every 3 years, it's a completely new set of people. So it ebbs and it flows. I don't think the document in itself is going to create patterns like one way or the other. The handbook is definitely there for us to lean on when we need to, and the conversations that need to be had, but the student groups come and go. And that's each new group of students going to bring a different set of challenges.
This year, that's why I don't have a very good answer, because this year, I think the data was the group of data was so small. And so I don't think it would provide really any accurate trends. I think after next year, I think all of that can be pulled from Skyward, and we can, I've got a file, and we keep files of our, interactions or disciplinary actions too. But mine this year was very, very thin. So
And I was just going to piggyback, when they're only in school for 2 days a week for a semester, and then, for another quarter, they weren't here at all. So when we think about like true data, we had fourth quarter, and that itself is got its own set of challenges, hitting the home stretch of any global pandemic year with 3 different learning models. So I don't think the data, even last year, after everyone went home on March 17th, I don't think the data over the last 2 years is anything that we can lean on. We'd have to do historical data from 5 years out to kind of see where we were. So,
Well, put that in the back of your mind and know, and maybe in a year or 2 or 3, that I personally would be interested in hearing more about sort of trends and data and success rates and whatever you could tell us. Again, I'm everyone done. Did you have any final comments, Dr. Hillman? So thank you both, Nancy and Michael. And it was great to have you talk to us, and we hope to hear from you again sometime.
nice to see everybody. I'm all together here in a group.
thank you. Just want to apologize to Claudia. Called her the wrong name.
She also has a nameplate, Michael.
Okay.
Well, we've managed you up in a number of ways tonight, though. So
We're going to move on to 5C, Policy Committee Recommendations. Dr. Hillman, you want to tell us about these?
Yeah, so first reading, 3 policies. 102, equal educational opportunity. What is included mostly in this particular policy are MSBA recommended changes. You'll also notice one of the things that we're trying to work to do is when we make modifications in policy where we reference other policies, we're now providing live links so that people are able to go directly to that policy as opposed to having to look it up again, trying to make our policy manual a little bit more user friendly. And so again, some fairly simple changes here. It's really these are MSBA recommended statutory changes in policy 102. When we take a look at policy 441, this is the one of the 3 that we're proposing for first reading tonight that has the most significant changes. You'll notice that our policy committee is really working hard to create consistent style across all of our policies. So you're going to see those in every one. Things like, for example, the way that we reference the school district being consistent with that, and other items that we're just trying to have consistent language across all policies. But this policy, the use of technology and telecommunication systems by employees, it has some of the most, I would say, significant changes. It's not a ton of them, but what we're just trying to do is we're trying to update. Anytime you have a policy that governs technology, it can be quickly outdated. So you'll just see some changes in some of the definitions that we use as we move ahead. So that is policy 441. And then finally, student activity accounting. Again, some very really basic changes here that were recommended by Director of Finance Val Murdersdorf. Really just about the fundraising report is the most significant part. Normally, Val was reporting to you in May and November. We believe it's just more appropriate to report in January and July. So I believe that I have hit the highlights of the changes.
Thank you, Dr. Hillman. So I'd like to get comments one at a time on these documents, starting with policy 102. Does anybody have any questions or comments about 102? Well, that's going to make the meeting go fast. So we'll move on to the next document. And that is policy
441.
441. Sorry, I was at the bottom of it. 441, the technology and telecommunication systems. This is a long one. I'm going to give you a little extra time. Any questions or comments? I know 3 of us are on the policy committee, so we've already had lots of comments. Okay, moving on to policy 713, student activity accounting. Any questions? Tom, thank you.
I was just curious at the top under purpose, you cross off school board and referred to it as Board of Education. And then through the rest of the document, you refer to it as school board. Why is it so specific there as Board of Education?
Because apparently we didn't catch the rest of them. So because what you're going to see in policies is that we're switching it has been because these policies have evolved over the years, and frankly, sometimes they came from different school districts, sometimes they came from MSBA. We are attempting to make sure that every time that we talk about the board, we're talking about the Board of Education. So it is simply that we did not catch the other ones, Tom. So we will have that fixed for the next time. Thank you for pointing that out.
Other questions, comments? Claudia.
On going back to policy 441, where would there be guidance on social media during the school day as part of say a staff member has a break and they want to check their social media? Is there guidance on if they can or cannot post during that time? Is it in this policy or another one?
Yeah, we do not have a policy specific to that. Where I would say that would be covered, there's a segment that allows employees to use school district technology for personal purposes, which I would characterize social media as long as it doesn't interfere with their regular duties. So that is the way that I would say that it is addressed in this policy.
Other comments on any of the policies? All right, and we will be voting on this next meeting?
In July,
In
yes.
July, okay. Moving on to agenda item 5D, the legislative update. Turning it over to Dr. Hillman and the Legislative Action Committee.
So I would just be silent for several seconds because there's really not much of a legislative update. Actually, as we know that the legislature was not able to complete their work on time, unfortunately. So the special session was called for today. So Governor Walz called the legislature into special session. And what we know is that there have been final agreements reached on 4 budget bills. So we know that agriculture and broadband has been completed, commerce and energy, higher ed, and legacy. And others are very close. And we understand that the E12 education finance bill is quite close. We do not have the specifics on that, though I will say one of my favorite things to do on Monday morning is to watch Almanac while I'm on the treadmill. And they had Speaker Hortman and they had Senator Gazelka. And what Representative Hortman said is that in all throughout the special session that each chamber is going to have what they refer to as their bucket of disappointments. And so Representative Hortman gave us the bad news that it does not appear that the basic formula will get linked to inflation. We actually thought that might have a chance. I mean, it lasted longer than it's lasted in the past. And so I think that speaks well a bit that we have moved the ball down the field on linking the formula to inflation. It does not sound as if that's going to happen this time. And for me, something that I have been pretty vocal about with our representatives is ending up in Senator Gazelka's bucket of disappointments in the backdoor what I call the backdoor voucher bill will not make it as what they indicated on Almanac, something that we've been paying attention to. We did not think that part, it actually lasted a lot longer this time than I thought it would. We thought that it might be used at the conference committee for some trade, but we will continue to watch the situation with vouchers, is now called the educational savings accounts. We know that the governor had publicly spoken last week that it was a non-starter. So those would be, I think, if you look at both sides of the coin, the Senate's priorities and the House's priorities, those are two key pieces of their platform that are just not going to make it, is what it sounds like, into the final bill. We'll continue to pay close attention. And hopefully what I can tell you is that hearing from a variety of different sources, there was a court case in 2017 that really changed the way that both parties look at a shutdown. So we've had a government shutdown, as you know, in Minnesota a couple of times. Those consequences are far more serious now than they were in the past, to where the previous shutdown was really more of there were still a number of services that could run. Even fewer services are able to run now. So both Speaker Hortman and Senator Gazelka were very adamant that they will finish their work well before June 30th because they do not want to risk a shutdown. So we'll continue to inform you. I'd like to invite if Claudia or Corey, who are also members of the Legislative Action, maybe they have something from another source that I don't have that they can offer to share this evening, but we continue to pay close attention.
I guess the only one thing I'd add for the process part is I believe once a bill is agreed to in principle, they need to have it read publicly 3 consecutive days. So June 26th, I think, or 27th would be the day we need to look for. If something's not agreed to in public by then it looks like there will be a shutdown. So is that correct? Do you know that, Matt, offhand? Or
I don't know that particular level of detail.
I don't know the details of the 3 consecutive days, but basically an announcement has to be made by the 26th or 27th, which I think is on the weekend. So
Any other comments? Okay, moving on to agenda item 5E, the COVID-19 response and operations update. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, so update number 23 for you this evening. And really my intent this evening is to just do a very brief overview now that we have made it through the end of the school year. And I just want us to take a moment and pause and think about that. There's some data I'm going to share with you that I think when we look back to last August, when we were implementing the Safe Learning Plan, I think people had some hypotheses about how we would end up. It has been, I am proud of the work that we have done. I am proud of the decisions that we made this school year, often with little data and not enough time to really make the kind of decision that we normally do. But we learned a lot from that. And I think that we always centered our decisions on the health and wellness of our students, our staff, and our community. And so I think the board should be incredibly proud of the staff, the students, and the community who came together. And if you think about when we actually finished this school year, it's frankly a miracle in a lot of different ways. And there's just no other way to say it. When we look at the data, I provided you the graph that I've shared with you a number of times. And so a celebration is that last week, we have all become very familiar with the county case rate per 10,000 residents. And as you know, we've talked about that number being over 100 before at this board table, not this board table, but at the previous one at the high school. But last week it was 5.02. That is wonderful news to celebrate. And it's no coincidence that the numbers started to improve when vaccination became available. So I think when we look back on the year and we think about how Northfield Public Schools was ahead of the trend. If you recall, in December, we were the first school district to have a partnership with the Minnesota Department of Health to do testing, regular testing. They used that pilot and expanded it to the rest of the school districts in the state. In late January, we were among the first people to have special education staff vaccinated through a partnership with Northfield Hospital and clinics. And then very soon after, the rest of our staff, because of the relationship that we had with Northfield Hospital and clinics, by spring break, every single one of our employees, including substitutes, had multiple opportunities where they could have been vaccinated. So I think about those things and those pieces of how we helped our staff over the year to make sure that they had the tools that they need to make this year as successful as possible. So at the end of the day, when we completed 170 school days, but this goes back to actually even just a little bit before that, we totaled 263 COVID-19 cases amongst district staff and students who are engaged in on-campus activities. So that does not count Portage families, for example, who may have tested positive but weren't on campus. In the chart, I shared with you the total number of cases per building. Normally, if it's under 5, I've given you a less than 5, but I want you to see the Northfield Area Learning Center had 2 cases the entire year. And both of those cases were when we were in, well, one of them was when we were in distance learning and another was a staff case. So I think the mitigation strategies that we did, when you think about all the people on campus each day, they worked. They were hard. The work was hard. We did not please people all of the time. Our principals and our other directors of programming, sometimes in on the weekends to look at a seating arrangement in a classroom to determine who needed to be quarantined because there was a specific case. They could have probably looked at a seating chart, but no, they wanted to make sure they only excluded students who truly were within 6 feet. There were no weekends for these people for an entire school year. And so these people have done such, our principals, our school nurses, they've done an amazing job managing this. Our teachers did an excellent job of managing something that, if you think back to last August when we talked about a mask mandate and how difficult it was going to be to get for students to comply. Did we have issues? They're children. Of course we had some issues, but overall I have toured in every school dozens of times this school year. And in general, kids were complying. Did kids have to be reminded to pull their mask up? Of course they did. The general public needed to have that reminder from time to time, right? So everybody pulled together and worked together to create an outcome where we limited transmission. Can we unequivocally say that there was no transmission at school? I cannot look you in the eye and say that. But what I will tell you is public health has routinely told us that we have done an exceptional job of minimizing, if not eliminating, any opportunity for spread in our schools. There's a national narrative about how this is a lost year. I disagree. There are many things that we've learned in society this year that would not have happened had we not been in these dire circumstances. But I also want to take this opportunity to share with the board, we cannot take a national narrative and put it on top of our local circumstances. It's great to read national news and it's great to read national trends, but we always have to look, are those trends true here? So one of the national narratives is that students were not in school. I have the data to prove otherwise. In your packet, I share with you that we prioritized the in-person learning and we prioritized our youngest students to make sure that the circumstances that those youngest learners could be in as many days as they could. It is hard for me to calculate how many days our preschoolers were in because not everybody's in every day, right? But when I talk about pre-kindergarten through second grade students, when they were on campus in person 5 days a week, 81% of the scheduled school days of the year. Third through fifth grade students in person 5 days a week for 77% of the school year days. Northfield Area Learning Center, Northfield High School, and Northfield Middle School students, they were on campus in either the hybrid model where they were attending school every day, but they were only attending school on campus 2 days a week. They attended school at home through online learning those other 3 days a week. And we were able to either be in the hybrid model or the in-person model 75% of the year, including the full last quarter, which does account because fourth quarter had more days for approximately 30% of the year. So I had some questions when we were shifted to in-person learning. It's the last quarter. Why would you do that? Well, it was 30% of the year that kids got to be full person every day. In my mind, that was absolutely worth it. And after a couple weeks of discomfort, because unwinding or coming back to those things is very uncomfortable for a lot of students. But after I spoke with a student who had had the courage to email me to say, I'm really worried the first couple of days back. I spoke with that student about 2.5, 3 weeks later, and they said, you know, Dr. Hillman, it took me a few days because I wasn't used to it. And he felt safe again. And so while that return to in-person for secondary was difficult, we honor that, right? It was difficult for a lot of people, but it was successful. And we finished the year successfully. I think one of the other goals that we had was to minimize how much were we in and out of these learning models, right? Remember when we first pitched the safe learning plans with the way we adopted it in Northfield, we talked about wanting to try to keep as much consistency as we could. We had guiding principles that we used to make these decisions. And if you look at it, pre-kindergarten through fifth grade students really had one transition. We had to shift to distance learning when the public health situation became untenable by public health standards and what the advice that we got from public health and the Minnesota Department of Health in November. They had that segment of distance learning between November 23rd and January 19th. That's the only segment that the entire system was out. And very similar for middle school and high school had two transitions because they transitioned, you know, from hybrid to distance learning, hybrid, and then into in-person learning at the end of the year. Now, that does not count the individual classrooms that had to go home on quarantine because of an exposure at the elementary school or other students who had other individual quarantines. We can't account for that. But I think if we were all to try to go back to last September, and if we were to predict how much would we have been in school, I will tell you, I would bet a lot of the change in my pocket, which I don't have any, that people would have bet less than what we were because we didn't know. No one has done this before. So I believe in telling stories and using data to support them. And so I hope I have shared that with you through these 24 updates, 23 updates, whatever it's been, 23. We have endeavored to make sure that our community was protected, both from a physical and an emotional health perspective. Now we have to acknowledge not everyone always agreed. And I was pleased that people told me that sometimes. But at the end of the day, I've said many times in my 43 updates to parents that when this is over, we have to look each other in the eye at the grocery store, at church, and at other meetings and have had community with each other. And I am proud of how we have done that. Our school district administrators have taken the high road many, many times because we understood that people were in these very difficult circumstances. Their jobs, their ability to care for their children, this is their kids' one shot at childhood, right? So we forgive people and we ask them for their forgiveness if they feel that we did not always do right by them. What I can say easily is that every time we came from a place of intent of the health and safety of our students in our community, while also prioritizing instruction. And so I think we can be proud of how we handled it this year. I appreciate the fact that we've had some emotional and sometimes very difficult dialogue through the year, some very difficult decisions that we had to make that meant that certain students may not have gotten to participate in something that they really wanted to participate in. But we needed to make those decisions for the greater good. And the fact that we were in person for the entire last quarter, I think validates the work that we have done. And so I am proud of the work that the school district and community have done. I think when history looks back at this time, they're going to look at a community that was honest with themselves, was willing to have courageous conversations, and emerges, right? That's what we're talking about now. We're talking about strategic emergence, a new term I learned today, from the pandemic. And I fully believe we are going to come out better than what we went in. And when we say that, we also have to acknowledge the hurt that has happened in this community. Because people, have had very difficult things with their jobs, the loss of beloved family members. These things really impacted people in various ways. So this strategic emergence did not come without a cost, and we cannot forget that. And I personally will not allow the community to forget what our educators did to support our students and families and the community at this time. I maintain that public schools over the last 15 months demonstrated we are the most effective unit of government, period. And I will debate that anytime, anywhere with people, because we delivered on what we said we would do, and we were honest about the things that we could not do. Finally, I want to thank the board. We could not have done this without your support. In August, you took an action that really empowered me to make the decisions based on data and based on the certain circumstances so that we could keep making decisions that were the best. That support was essential in our managing of the pandemic. I thank you for your trust. I thank you for your confidence. And I think you should be proud of what we put forward as well. Now, what's next? I have also included with you the vaccination update. We have more work to do. We are not at 70%, and we have fallen behind. Vaccination is a personal choice. Our job as the school district is to try to connect people between vaccination opportunities and where they can get them, if you will. So we'll continue that through the summer. We'll continue to update our vaccination page so that people are aware of it and where places where they can go. We recently partnered with Alina Clinic. We got another 90 people vaccinated through that partnership. Benjamin Bus, thanks to them, they provided free transportation from 3 strategic locations in the community to get people to Alina Clinic for that vaccination opportunity. We understand that probably this fall, students younger than 12 may be eligible for that. And again, vaccination is a personal choice. Every family has to make the decision that's right for them. We just look at our convening power to try to be able to help people make those connections. I'm going to shift to you that we're going to talk a little bit about the Safe Learning Plan. The Safe Learning Plan is now sunset, which is why we are all here maskless, right? Because we now have a choice, right, in terms to do that. We've posted that we are strongly recommending that people who are not vaccinated wear a mask. And of course, I think you're going to see people mask at various points moving forward by their own choice at a lot of different times. But we have sunset that plan. And in your packet, I did include the summer school and program COVID-19 protocols. So we are using, as we always have, we are using the guidance. So what you're seeing is under face covering, strongly recommended that people inside school buildings wear a face covering if they are not vaccinated. Face coverings are still required on public transportation. That's part of the executive order. We are also requiring people who enter into a school nurse's office to put a mask on, and anyone who might display some of the lesser common symptoms, our school nurses may recommend to that family that student mask for the day so they might be able to stay at school. We are going to try to provide as much physical distancing as we possibly can as practicable. We are still continuing to do our routine environmental cleaning and those kinds of things and disinfection, though we have learned a lot about the virus and how it does not stay on surfaces as much as they initially thought. We are handling the suspected cases of COVID-19 in a little bit of a different way. We are still asking families to report, but we are not having the same level of contact tracing or quarantine that we had in the past. Now, what I will tell you is that all of that is true except for our licensed childcare center, because our licensed childcare centers are governed under the Department of Human Services. The Department of Human Services is saying that there is a part of the executive order that requires that childcare centers continue to do masking and all of those other pieces through June 30th or until the state gets to 70% in terms of vaccination. So we have communicated with that with families. So in general, most programs, we are basically kind of almost back to where we were before with some exceptions. And our childcare program, those students need to continue to mask under the DHS orders as we move forward. And staff, yes. Now, what I will tell you is what we're hearing from the Department of Education is that the guidance that they gave us for the summer, if the data continues in this direction, is most likely the guidance that we will have for the fall. And so what I will tell you is this is very likely the safe learning plan for 21-22. So just so you're aware of that, that is most likely the case. Now, as we move in, I'm just going to preview the next topic before we take any questions. We've been learning about the ESSER 3 funds. These are the funds that are coming to schools as part of the American Rescue Plan. We're going to talk about just a little bit about how Val and I have worked through that in just a moment. But there was a lot of back and forth on a reporting requirement or a public comment requirement, I should say. And we had initially understood that we had to have people have public comment on how we were going to spend the funds. That is not the case. We have to have people have public comment on our return to learning plan. Let's just say there's been a lot of discussion with this at the state over the last week. And so essentially, we have already completed all of the public comment because we were allowed to use the safe learning plan that was adopted last August. If you recall, we have had public comment opportunity at every board meeting, either mostly via email until tonight. We know we had people provide public comment on the safe learning plan, if you recall, back in August and September. In addition, we had brought together several community groups last summer to give us feedback on our safe learning plan. So I understand that we are already in compliance with that public comment period. We are going to post that, the safe learning plan that we used this year, and a summary of those public comments on our website. We have to do that in order to comply with the ESSER requirements. I'm also going to post this as the potential preliminary plan for next year, just as another layer of precaution. So that is the plan what we're using for the summer as we move forward, of course, subject to change based on public health circumstances. So I appreciate the board's support. On behalf of the school district, we thank the community for your support and your helping us through this. We have come through it together and we look forward to what's next. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hillman. Any questions or comments from the board? No.
Will the standard, will the standards be so many cases per 10,000 residents in the future?
That's a great question, Noel. We do not know the answer to that. I think the state is waiting until they see how the summer goes before they provide their next guidance. What we are hoping, and I think what the experts are telling us, is that the more vaccination that happens, that is going to continue to help reduce the number of cases. So as you recall, in January, Governor Walz announced that county case rate was no longer the primary metric. Of course, we continue to pay attention to it. We do not know what metrics they're going to use yet this fall, though they are tipping their hand that I'm not sure they are going to use metrics at the state level anymore. I think they are going to defer to local boards to make those decisions.
Thank you.
Other comments? Tom?
As a parent, as a parent of a teenager who, pushes things and didn't want to go to school with a mask, I just want to express my appreciation to his fellow students, the teachers, the administrative staff, and everyone for pulling off a successful year. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tom.
Claudia?
Thank you, Tom, for sharing that. I feel the same way. I'm just incredibly proud of the leadership you've given our district, Matt. And there are no words to express how grateful I am for our teachers and staff and nurses and bus drivers and everybody at the school. I'm just so grateful for the hard work that they pulled off these last 2 school years. So thank you.
And I want to emphasize it took everybody. Everybody did something a little bit different, and everyone deserves that. I appreciate you recognizing that, because it doesn't matter what your job in the district was. It was different this year. Anita was coordinating vaccinations. I don't think that was in the job description, Anita.
Other comments? No?
I want to say thank you to Dr. Hillman for his leadership, which I think his style is contagious. And I think it helps the district leadership overall to see that the superintendent is leading in a way that's contagious. And thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Comments? Well, I have a question, Dr. Hillman. So are we done recording how many cases in each school, or will you continue with that?
So we are going to do our best to continue to count the cases. We're going to reimagine how the dashboard looks. There's a couple things that will continue coming out. We'll still continue to try to update the dashboard. It's a little bit harder because in the summer, our school structure is just very different. So for the summer, we may just have to go to a total cases through the system because it just isn't the same structure. The other piece that we will continue to calculate, actually, we've always calculated it, but we've just never published, is the influenza-like illness rate. That's a big deal. We think that that can inform some decisions that families might make, moving forward, as we learn how COVID-19 continues to be among us, and along with influenza and other kind of respiratory illnesses in the winter. That influenza-like illness rate is something we've always paid attention to, but I think it's something that we'll continue to be able to calculate, and we'll be calculating, doing our best with that in the summer programs as well. Again, our summer programs are a little bit different. Not everybody comes every day, right? We don't have the same clientele every single day. So it isn't the same as being able to calculate it during the school year, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we can keep abreast of what is happening in each of our programs. And of course, make necessary decisions should we see the public health circumstance deteriorate.
That makes a lot of sense for parents to have access to the influenza-like illness rate, because you hear things, but it's nice to actually have some facts behind that. And I just want to second or third or fourth what everyone has said, with a deep gratitude to all of the employees of the district and all of their unusual and hard work and all of the risks that they took themselves to be able to educate our students. I deeply appreciate everything they've done. Okay, moving on now to agenda 5F, the ESSER 3 plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hillman and Val Murdersdorf.
Yeah, this is going to be actually quite brief because, again, when we had put this in the agenda, we were still thinking that it was the budget that had to be out for public comment, but it turned that is not the case. It is the return to learn plan, which I have shared with you in the packet. And I want to just share why that is. As you know, there are many states where students, or large school systems where students were not in person until the end of the school year. So in those states, the American Rescue Plan's requirement for the safe return to learning plan is much more important. Ours has been in place for the whole year, which is why Minnesota is just a little bit different. I'm going to characterize how we are continuing to work toward using the ESSER $3 or the American Rescue Plan dollars. So what I have stated many times is that we look at the American Rescue Plan and the other federal funds for things that we talk about with what we call recovery and stability. So when we talk about recovery, we're talking about learning acceleration. When we talk about learning acceleration, we're talking about both academic and social emotional learning acceleration. So I've shared with you, we've spent all of our ESSER $2, a little bit more than $1 million so far, on brand new positions that are for 1 year. As I've shared before, our high school, our middle school, and our area learning center have used one of their 2 additional FTE to hire an additional guidance counselor. That's that recovery, right? Our elementaries are using them to reduce class size, again, recovery, so we can break down the largest grade levels, the 2 largest grade levels at each building, to get those classroom sizes as small as possible so students can get that individual interaction that we know is going to be important to the recovery. That second part about stability is also critical. We do not yet know what the financial fallout of the pandemic is. Now, I think we continue to hear some good news. The fact that the state had a I think it's fair to say a significantly larger budget surplus just with the tax revenue, I should say, with the latest report last week is a good sign, but we still don't know how this is all going to play out. So our ESSER 3 funds, we are looking at, again, a portion for recovery and specifically looking at ways that we can support the social emotional health of both students and staff. And then a major portion of the ESSER 3 funds we are looking to use for stability. So we have a real concern if we invest in a lot of one-time positions, those positions are there for a short period of time and then go away. That's not good for anyone. And one of our goals is sustainability, right? It's right in our vision statement. So we plan to use a significant portion of our ESSER 3 funds for stability. We can expend those funds. I'm going to have Al just give the specifics. I think we can expend them through 2023. So do you want to just talk a little bit about just the procedures for that part of it?
Sure. I'm gonna just recap the amounts we're getting because we actually have those in print now. So for ESSER 2, we got $1,166,000. And then the ESSER 3, there's actually two buckets. There's an 80% bucket and a 20% bucket. The 20% is specific for summer programming or basically out of school time programming. And that was about 523,000. And then the 80% bucket was just shy of 2.1 million. So 1.165 and 2.6 million are the two buckets. And basically, almost all federal funds have a 24-month, 27-month window. So we will be able to expend the ESSER 2 funds through, I'm pretty sure they're both through the September of 2023. So they'll cover 3 summers of programming and 2 school years of programming, if that makes sense. So will provide us a lot of opportunity to make sure that we're being intentional with how we're spending the funding.
No, I'll give you one example from recovery and stability that we've already approved is that we had hired health aides this year at each of our schools to assist the school nurse, right, with the additional influx of health related concerns that we had expected. And we were very happy we hired those health aides. And as we move into next year, not understanding exactly where we'll be, we have hired those health aides back again, not necessarily for the same amount of time that we had done this year, but we think that that's really important for our school nurses as they emerge from the pandemic to have that additional support next year. It's a fairly low cost overall intervention that we're using, again, that's providing stability in our health services department, while also making sure we support the recovery, coming out of COVID. So we think that that's just one example of one of the things that we're looking at using our ESSER 3 dollars for. And we'd be happy to take any questions. We'll have a more detailed piece for you at the July meeting.
Questions? Claudia?
Matt, you said some of it, one of the actions that we took was to reduce class size.
Correct.
Did that include moving students to a different class to reduce that class size and hiring another staff member?
So this is for next school year.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we're not, so what we're talking, so that's exactly the case. So each elementary every building got 2 additional FTE, except for the area learning center. They got 1, a much smaller group of students. And so the building principals at the elementaries were directed that they could use it to reduce general education classroom size. So if they had a 4-section grade where they felt that the numbers were a little bit too high compared to the academic and social emotional profile of that grade, they could add a 5th section. In some cases at Greenville Park, for example, they might have had 3 sections that we would normally have assigned 3 sections for those students. They're expanding it to 4, again, to lower that class size. So we have hired some additional teachers at each of those buildings to break that down. At the secondary level, again, what they've chosen to use one of their FTE for is another guidance counselor. And then one FTE at the high school and middle school can go quite a bit further. You don't hire one person in that to reduce class size. Most often you use it for overloads so that we can add 1 section, because you can't hire 1 7th grade teacher to cover all 4 core subject areas. So they tend to use those for overloads so that they're able to break those classes down a little bit, but not necessarily hire 1 FTE, if that makes sense.
Okay. And that would be a temporary position.
1 year, correct.
1 year. Okay.
And that's one of the reasons that we're trying to reserve so much of the ESSER 3 dollars is that we want to see what of these things that we're doing next year are successful. And reserving a significant chunk of those ESSER 3 dollars allows us to potentially fund some of those positions for at least 1 more year. So it gives us some of the greatest flexibility.
Okay. And then I also was wondering, Val, you said we're using some of the funds for, well, they're specifically meant to be used for after school or summer school. And then the other funds are to be used for this hiring or?
Yep, the 80% bucket has the same exact parameters as the ESSER two funding. So they have a list of about 15 different criteria. They're pretty broad. And I think the last one that they added was basically for existing budget expenditures. So it's their caveat to say if you need to cover your existing budget, you can. So it's pretty flexible with what we're able to do. But obviously the class size reduction is an allowable expenditure in that.
And then just one more final question. Is the hiring a guidance counselor, their job description, I imagine, is very different than a counselor or social worker or mental health worker. A guidance counselor, I usually think, is somebody who helps organize schedule.
There's a variety of things that they do that, yes, but they also advise and are really one of the first points of contact for students with some of their social emotional needs. So guidance counselors do have a number of different responsibilities, including helping students pick the classes that they would like and so on and so forth. But they also are a primary focus on social emotional learning. And by adding an additional counselor, that's going to reduce some of the administrative work that they were doing before and provide some greater opportunity for them to support the social emotional work. And then also assist in helping make sure that the student gets to the appropriate resource, if it be a licensed school social worker or connecting them with a mental health practitioner in the community.
Tom?
So to make smaller class sizes, if we have a big bump in the kindergarten, that'll track through all 5 years.
Correct.
And so we could potentially be having big classes once these part-time drop out, or can we reassign or shift teachers depending on the class sizes?
Well, I'm really hoping what you just said comes true, right? Because a large kindergarten class is a great thing for us in a lot of different ways. So these things don't usurp strategies that we've used in the past, like contingency. So one of the things that we have done for well before I was here is we build into the budget each year up to, I think we're now at 3.0. So we budget 3.0 contingency FTE. And what that means is that when we get to August and we see there's a need for additional sections because of a larger grade level, we are able to hire people to address that circumstance. That money comes back to again, it's a 1-year position. The district brings that money back. And then, so if you have a class that's very large, it could be that contingency might be with them in certain years. And then frankly, if we see that larger class, we will just build that into the budget moving forward as they move through. It's one of the ways that we really are, as you know, we're very serious about aligning resources with what our goals are. And we're going to even be more serious about that, coming forward if it's possible. But we're going to be even more laser focused on that. If we know we have a kindergarten grade level that's larger that needs to be in 5 sections, we've had that happen several times before. And if we don't have bubbles in other parts of the system, we may use contingency to support that 1 year. But we have also done where we've used general funds to make those class sizes reasonable.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Dr. Hillman and Val. Moving on to the consent agenda, which has minutes, gift agreements, and personnel items in it. I want to remind you that there are also a number of additional personnel items in the table file to be added to the consent grouping. Is there anything that anyone wants to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Okay. Now I need a motion to approve the consent grouping. Tom? Motion by Tom. Is there a second? Second by Corey. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Moving on to the next item, the items for individual action. We're going to start out with policy 950, the land acknowledgement. The board's requested to approve the 950 land acknowledgements as presented at the May 10th, 2021 school board meeting. Do I have a motion? Claudia? Moved by Claudia. Is there a second? Second by Noel. Any discussion? Well, all right. Everyone in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to agenda item 7B, the handbooks 21, 22, and it's the handbooks for the ALC, elementary, middle, high school, co-curricular, early ventures, kid ventures handbooks, the child nutrition appendix, and the student citizenship handbook for the year 21-22. Do I have a motion to approve these handbooks? Moved by Tom. Is there a second? Second by Jeff. All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. On to agenda item 7C, revised 2021-22 school year calendar and proposed 22-23 school year calendar. The boards, does anyone have a motion to approve the revised school year calendars and the proposed school year calendar?
I think we do have them individual here, Amy. So we'll do the
Oh.
21-22 first.
Okay. Do I have a motion for the 21-22 calendar? So moved by Noel. Anyone for second? Seconded by Corey. Any discussion on the 21-22 calendar, revised calendar? Okay, all in favor of the motion to approve the 21-22 calendar, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, so then the second motion we'll need is approving the proposed 2022-23 school year calendar.
If I can just make a quick comment before
Yeah.
there was one change between the presented one at the last meeting and this one. The request came from the high school. So for the last quite a few calendars, graduation had been the Sunday before the last day of school. The high school requested that with the 22-23 calendar that we move to have graduation be the Sunday after the last day of school. Seniors will still get out a couple of days early, but the high school has asked that we make graduation the capstone experience of their school year, as opposed to having, students have to come back that next week. So that's a difference between the previous iteration of the calendar and this one. So I just wanted to point that out to people here this evening before you voted on this.
Any comments or questions? And I did take a motion, right?
Yep. Now
Okay.
you need to take a motion. Yes.
So is there a motion to approve the proposed 2022-23 school year calendar with the one change? Moved by Tom. Is there a second?
No,
Sec-
I had a question, actually.
There's a second? Second by Corey. And a question from Jeff.
Are you suggesting to put that on here now?
It's already in. It was
So,
just the change from the draft one from the last time to the one that you got tonight. I just wanted to point out that it was a different graduation date in this version than the one that we shared with you at the last meeting.
so how much work and feedback from parents and stakeholders and everything to make that change? I mean, if it's a week difference on graduation, is that okay? Is that acceptable? Is that the way other school districts do it? Not that that's.
School districts do it very differently. There are some districts that graduate before. There's quite a few who graduate. In fact, there was quite a few that graduated last Friday and Saturday. Now, a lot of those districts, their graduations are dependent upon the venue, right? Many of those are larger metropolitan school districts. I think the key thing was around making sure, actually, frankly, it was about academic time. And so the one thing is that now that we're adopting calendars 2 years out, we don't have people who have been planning graduation for 2023 quite yet. The moment that you approve this, they will. And so we wanted to make sure we had it part of the calendar that you're adopting. And it was a request that came from the high school.
Okay, so that would move it up a week. I mean, even we talked about a long time ago when we got into calendars and stuff. I mean, even having more like a state calendar. So if you have a bunch of kids, they go to college and state school, I mean, they're done in May. So I mean, if you could move that graduation forward a week, that opens up your summer and you're off to the races doing whatever.
Yeah,
you
and to be
want do.
clear, we're moving it back a week. It's later.
Bringing it
Yep.
back, that's what I
Yep.
meant to say.
We're moving it later than a week later than what it typically has been.
Okay, sure.
Any other questions, comments? I have a question, Dr. Hillman. Do you foresee that there might be other changes to this calendar? And
Yeah, so our goal, there are always things that when you're putting a calendar together a couple of years out, right? There can always be some changes, some modifications. I think the key thing that we hear from families that we really want to try to avoid changing are things like spring break and the winter break. Many people have to bid for their vacation quite a bit in advance. So I have already had multiple questions about where's the 22-23 calendar, because in some industries, people have to bid for their vacation so far in advance, or there's a special trip that they want to take or those things. So could there be additional changes? Yes. Can I say that anything would happen with certainty? No, we try to avoid calendar changes unless there's a real significant reason. We're changing the 21-22 calendar because of the power of family conferences. When we can create relationships up front with families, we know that that is really rocket fuel for the culture for the rest of the school year. That was a kind of change that doesn't necessarily dramatically impact families in a lot of ways because we want them to be on campus one of those 2 family conference days. It didn't mess with spring break. It didn't mess with the winter break. So those kinds of things are okay. If we had tried to move the start date earlier, that could mess with people's schedules, right? Because if they're planning a late August vacation. So the kinds of calendar changes right now that we'd look to make would be as minimal as possible. Is it possible that there are other things that could come up? Sure. But we're going to really try to make sure we protect those parts of the year that we know families really rely on having advance notice. Spring break, winter break, graduation.
any other comments? Okay, then moving to a vote. So everyone, all in favor of moving to approve the 2022-23 school year calendar as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now we're to agenda item 7D, pay equity. And I need a motion to approve the action plan and proposed salary increases as presented. Do I have a motion? Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Second by Tom. Any discussion? Okay, well, with no discussion, then we'll go to the vote. And so all in favor of the motion to approve the action plan and proposed salary increases as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving on to items for information. Dr. Hillman, you wanted to talk about the end of year enrollment report.
Yeah, so in the table file, you had a copy of the end of year enrollment report. You'll see at the far right-hand side that we ended with a grand total of 4,069 students. When we pull out the early childhood and part-time independent study area learning center students, we are at 3,832. So down just a little bit more than 60 students since the beginning of the school year. As you know, not totally uncommon for us to lose students during the school year. But that is our end of year enrollment report. So landing in the grand total at 4,069, which is increased since the beginning of the year because, of course, our early childhood numbers increased during the school year, as do our independent study area learning center numbers. That is also sometimes where we'll see students who will leave being a full-time student, if you will, and move into that part-time student status. So you'll see the grand total increase while the full-time only decrease, which is not a totally uncommon thing to happen in the district.
Any questions, comments from the board? Jeff?
Well, that seems very normal then, doesn't it, basically?
Well, this year has been nothing
I mean,
close to normal, but
I'm saying, because we're always about 4,000 in a sense. So, I
Yeah.
mean, to be at that number.
I would say
Sounds pretty normal.
I'm going to ask Val to weigh in. Would you say that I think that it's fairly similar in terms of the trend during the school year? The number is, of course, lower this year because we did lose some students at the beginning of the year to homeschool and some other pieces because of the uncertainty around the pandemic.
Yeah, we do typically lose students. I think it's a little more than in a normal year. But we do definitely see that trend. But it's hard to know what the balance between, the early childhood going up and it's a little more than normal, but not dramatically different.
Other questions, comments? All right, thank you, Dr. Hillman. On to agenda item 9, future meetings. And then there was one coming up. Could you remind us, Anita? I'm sorry, I didn't write it down. A special board meeting on Wednesday, July 7th, 5:45 right here. Conference room. Okay, so that's our next meeting coming up. And then after that, the full board meeting will be on Monday, July 12th. We do not have a second meeting in June. So everybody enjoy your Junes. And then on to 2 meetings in August, on August 9th and August 23rd. And that's the last of future meetings. Now with that, I ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Noel, second. Jeff, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.